Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Ivey. I'm the China liaison for the American Folklore Society, and once upon a time was chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our session on 3 studies that prove art can change the world. I'll mention a couple of housekeeping things before I make my very brief introductory remarks. First of all, this is we're streaming this session. And what that means is, because of camera positions and sound, we're going to have to be a little bit more, rigorous or controlling than we sometimes would be in terms of questions and answers and where people are positioned. So if you have questions that develop during the 3 presentations, you've got 2 options. One is to use the note paper in front of you, write your question down and get it to me, and then at the end of the session, as we have time available, I will ask the question to the appropriate panelist. The alternative is there will be an audience microphone, I think located out in the middle of this aisle when the presentations are over, and so you will be able to come forward and speak to that mic. The key thing is, though, that you have to be on a microphone in order to be heard, and here comes a microphone, just as promised. Our ACE technicians are bringing. So you have to be on a microphone in order to be heard as part of the streaming process. So that said, since the middle of the last century, public policy and private industry have increasingly relied on research and quantifiable evidence when setting priorities. Arts organizations, artists have all too frequently found themselves operating in a world that's anecdote-rich but evidence-poor. We've traditionally told stories to convince powerful interests to support us, but now the push is toward research. Stories aren't enough. A new kind of storytelling using interviews, comparisons, numbers, and so on. So, appropriately, arts organizations and arts advocates have begun to move away from the poetic, emotional, philosophical statements of value toward those that stress quantifiable measures, economic impact, secondary effects on learning, on health, or on behavior, other arts effects that can be assembled and assessed using the techniques and language of social science. Now, if you go to standard definitions of research, those definitions usually stress a kind of open inquiry, systematic work to increase our store of knowledge, to establish or to confirm facts, to reaffirm earlier knowledge, to solve new or existing problems, or to test theories. So research in its purest sense is about a kind of pursuit of truth, solving specific problems, new knowledge. But in the arts, we have a different kind of relationship with research. We're more interested, especially interested, in research that is useful, rather than studies that are simply true. We've always pursued a kind of dual role. We want to answer a question, but we also want that answer to help us when we ask various sources of power, of influence, of financial support, when we ask them to endorse our work. So we always want to understand something, but we want to understand what might appeal to an audience, to convince political leaders, foundation executives, donors, and so on, that museums, orchestras, theater and dance companies, arts in schools, that artists themselves provide unique measurable benefits to society and therefore deserve various kinds of special treatment, most notably, usually, financial support. Now, in fact, when we move toward pure research, sometimes the results are a little bit uncomfortable. I think especially of that 4- or 5-year-old study that Wolf Brown conducted out in the Central Valley of California on arts participation that really showed that arts participation was there was a very active participation, but it wasn't in the work of the traditional arts institutions that the nonprofit world has, for the most part, supported and advanced over the years. And we also know that the kind of thing we're trying to measure is notoriously challenging. So we often fall back on correlation. Here's something happening here, and it seems to relate to something happening there, when rather than causation, simply because it's so difficult to demonstrate causation within the world in which we work. So kids who play musical instruments test higher in math, but is the playing why they test higher, or do smart kids just gravitate both to music and to math? Community arts organizations, which you are the representatives, function in a very intense, rough and tumble competitive environment in which perceived value is what separates winners and losers. You need to be able to demonstrate value in order to have your work honored as a priority. So that's why I think research is important. It justifies arts as a priority for political leadership and the general public, and research is the tool that helps craft those arguments. So we want information, but we want it to influence action, which is a special use of research. Ideally, our work, our results, should have an influence on everybody, and that would mean supporters and opponents. You want to change the world, and that's what the very aggressive assertion of the title of this session today is. You want, to phrase it in kind of spiritual terms, you want an argument that appeals to believers, agnostics, skeptics, and even to atheists. I think if we can really have an impact on the first three, we're doing well. We've seen how difficult it is in the case of, say, scientific research around human impact on global warming, how difficult it is to affect those people for whom belief precedes understanding that something that's scientifically demonstrable is true. So today, I think all of you can engage the work of three very important and I think useful projects that assess the value of arts in different ways and in different contexts. And I hope that we'll have lively questions after we hear from each of them. Does research make a causal connection? Is that causal connection one that is useful to the arts community? And if it's only correlation, is that good enough? So I think there are many important questions that can come from these presentations. I'm going to say just a bit about each of them, and then we'll begin with Lori Schell. Lori is the director here in Nashville of Nashville's Music Makes Us initiative, an in-school program, and she'll be presenting some research about Music Makes Us. She'll discuss the results of what's called the Baseline Research Report connected with that project. She's a veteran nonprofit executive, a dancer and a dance educator, and she was the executive director of the California Alliance for Arts Education before joining us here in Nashville. After Lori, we'll hear from Professor Jay Green. He holds a 21st century chair in education reform at the University of Arkansas, and he will discuss outcomes from student visits to Bentonville's Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And his work is in educational metrics, assessing information, data on graduation rates, and research on education. And then finally, we will have a presentation from Jack Teebs, who's professor of psychiatry, child study, and public health. Those are all part of his title at the Yale School of Medicine. And he will discuss the community impact of a long-term study of a Philadelphia mural arts project, the Porchlight Initiative. So with those brief introductions, let me begin by introducing Lori Schell.
Oh, it worked. Good morning. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to talk to this group. As Bill said, my name is Lori Schell. I've been in Nashville for 2 years, and I'm the new director for this wonderful new initiative called Music Makes Us. It's a public-private initiative that is really a great collaboration between the mayor's office, whom you heard yesterday talk a little bit about Music Makes Us, and the school district and the music industry here in Nashville. And just a few words about that and a context before we get started on what this research is about. So what is Music Makes Us, and how does it fit within the context of the school environment? Music Makes Us, as the mayor says, what we're going to end up here is the best music education program in the world. No little pressure there. We are endeavoring to create and to focus on music literacy and music participation. And yes, we want to enhance the traditional chorus, band, and orchestra programs, but we're also bringing to the forefront non-traditional programs such as mariachi, hip-hop, world percussion, and country bluegrass and songwriting, and programs that our students are just totally engaged in participating in and want to participate in, but haven't had the opportunity to do that in a school setting. So it's a real traditional plus non-traditional focus to have more students participate in music. So that's kind of the theory of action. More students participate in music, and that will be what we hope will be a good thing all around. Not just because music is a good thing, because we all know it is, just because, that's the argument, but music is a good thing for a complete education. This study, as you might imagine, I'm not the researcher for this study, unlike my esteemed colleagues here. My undergraduate degree in psychology was long ago, so I don't speak that language so well, but I will endeavor to present their findings with fidelity here. The research was carried out by Becky Eason and Chris Johnson of the University of Kansas, and we spent a year with them. They looked at both qualitative and quantitative measures. The purpose of the study was to establish a baseline of data about music participation in metro schools. We wanted, before we started doing a lot of crazy things and new things in our school district, we wanted to better understand what the potential effects were and implications of music education, of Music Makes Us initiative. Our school district is an interesting one. Looking at Nashville from your vantage point, you think, okay, this is a pretty well-to-do community. We have an urban school district, 83,000, soon to be 85,000 students, with a 75% free and reduced lunch rate. So it's a fairly high poverty school district, about 35% white, 45 or 40% African American, 14% Hispanic population, 4% Asian, and about 130 different languages are spoken in our school district. So we have a very, very fast-changing demographic, very interesting district to work in. We wanted to look to see, first of all, who is taking music in our schools. We examined the cohort of 2012. So the quantitative part of the study looked at data of these 6,000 students. So the 6,000 students looked at their 4 years of participation in music. And we learned that 65% of those students were not participating in music at all, and about 35% were. Of those 35%, about 1,100 took music for a year or less, and about 940 took music for more than 1 year. And if you look at the graphs at the bottom of the chart, there's a further breakdown between chorus and band. You'll see that there's an interesting breakdown in the chorus numbers between male and female participants. And this is not unique to Nashville. And the chorus participants, we have almost twice as many female as male participants. That has to do with the changing voice and what's considered cool and who the teacher is. But it's something that we do want to address. It also has to do with how many choral programs are in the middle school, and that's something we know we need to address in our schools. It's more equal participation among band students. We looked at what we could measure. So we have a very sophisticated department of data and analysis in our school department. So all of the data comes from internal data measurements, and our researchers selected ways to look at and analyze this data. So we looked at school attendance, and you'll see that we looked at 3 ways of measuring, of looking at this data. The column on the left looks at the non-music students, in the middle, a year or less of music study, and on the right, a year or more, more than a year of music study. So we go from 87% to 93% for those students studying more than a year. Discipline referrals, the line goes the other way. For those who study no music at all, we have 4.34 discipline referrals, and an average over a 4-year period. To those studying more than a year of music, 3.23. So the number of reports goes down. The grade point average goes up. The more years of music study, the higher the grade point average. On-time graduation rates was really the most startling graph and outcome that we looked at. So for non-music participants, a 60% graduation rate to a 91% graduation rate for those who are studying for more than 1 year. And this is I think even more startling when you look at the breakdown between ethnicities. The overall patterns are sustained by ethnicity. The music-related graduation gap was greatest for Latino and white students, 37% and 34% respectively. And the difference means that Latino students who exceed the fine arts requirement, which in this district or the state is 1 year, means that if they take more than 1 year of music, they're 71% more likely to graduate on time than their Latino peers without any music, which is quite startling. And again, to go back to what Bill was saying earlier about causational versus correlational studies, these are definitely correlational studies. We are not saying that if you take music, you're going to Harvard. Would that would be true, but these are correlational studies. We think we've got something here. We think it means something here, but of course there are many other factors to look at. We also looked at ACT scores. In Tennessee, the students take, largely they take ACT rather than SAT as college prep, so this is the scores that we're looking at. So you can see that students who took no music classes scored in the 35th percentile, and with more than 1 year, they scored in the 45th percentile. There are differences between ethnicities. I won't show you that data. It reflects the same kind of growth in increments that are similar to this. This is an interesting slide. I won't spend a lot of time here, but an important component of the study was to develop a statistical model that would estimate relationships among music participation and student engagement and achievement. The model tested 4 paths of relationships among the variables and found important estimated effects for each pathway. On the left, the model shows that student characteristics have a large direct effect on music participation, and on the right, student engagement has an even larger effect on academic achievement. While the direct effect of music participation on academic achievement is considered to be important, the large direct effect of music participation on student engagement results in an indirect effect on academic achievement, which is marked by the dotted line. We also, as I mentioned, looked at qualitative measures. What difference does music make on student attitudes and engagement? The findings were grouped by emergent themes. Students who participate in music identify themselves as musicians, which may intensify the positive effects. Students described a number of positive academic behaviors that they attributed to their participation in music. They also described specific skills in music class that they believe transfer to other academic areas, such as math, literature, and foreign language. They also talk about music being a motivator and something that helped them regulate self-behavior and help them persist in their learning goals. Students report that music class had positive benefits on their mood, helping them feel more relaxed and accomplished and happier. So in sum, music has, we felt, the music has important direct and indirect effects on positive outcomes in student achievement and student engagement. The more a student participates in music, the more positive these benefits seem to become. And what we've been telling our funders and our policymakers and our administrators, this is an investment that is worth pursuing. So let us do our jobs. Let us do this work. This is making a difference in our students' lives. We've also recognized that there needs to be a concrete message that we can take out to the world that talks about these results in an elevator speech, in an escalator speech, as someone said yesterday, that we can begin to wrap our arms around. And again, I don't want to suggest that this is causational, but it is food for thought and helps us to deepen our work and to help folks believe in what we're doing. Students who study music for more than 1 year are 7% more likely to come to school each day, receive 26% fewer discipline referrals, 15% higher grade point average, 52% more likely to graduate on time, and score higher on the ACT in math and in English. So we think we're on the right path. We think we are helping our students succeed in college, career, work, and in life. And we think we're really getting somewhere. Thank you so much.
Now we'll hear from Professor Jay Green from University of Arkansas. Can you get out of this again?
Sure, I think I can. Here it is. Okay. Thanks to all of you for being here and listening to a bunch of research. I love research, but not everyone does. So I'm glad that there are other people at this conference who are also interested in learning more about the research on how students may benefit from exposure to the arts. Now, I come to this meeting to convince you that we need more random assignment experiments in the arts. That correlational research, like we just heard, is very good and useful for generating ideas about things that we should investigate further, but I don't think that we're able to move the ball forward in advocacy with additional correlational studies because they tend not to persuade people not already persuaded that the arts are beneficial. So I come to this from a background in education policy research and advocacy, not particular to the arts. And I can tell you that the way that people are persuaded in education policy debates, if they're open to persuasion at all, is with evidence, and the type of evidence that they can believe. And the difficulty with correlational research is that people don't know what to believe about it, and so it tends not to persuade them very much. So let me illustrate the type of problem here. So you can see here that there's a relationship between ice cream sales and murder rates. As ice cream sales go up, murder rates go up, and we really need to do something to stop ice cream sales. And in fact, actually, this was put together by a former researcher for Merck on the large number of claimed health remedies that had been suggested as beneficial from observational studies, just population studies. People who took these things had better health outcomes than people who didn't take these things, but people choose to take them themselves. They're not assigned to it. And when these different remedies were subject to random assignment experiments, none of them panned out. As it turns out, if we assign people by lottery to these various health remedies, they are no different in their health outcomes than people who take placebos. And there's a reason why the FDA only approves medicines that are subject to random assignment. It's because then causation is clearly established. And let me explain clearly, because I think about this all the time. Not everyone thinks about this, but what you really want to know to establish causation is what would happen to someone if they didn't do it, right? If we want to know the effect of doing something, we would want to know what happens if you don't do it. And the only way to do that is to invent an identical twin to yourself, a doppelganger, who's just like you in every way except didn't do that thing. And then we would know the difference between doing it and not doing it. People who choose to engage in the arts are different from people who choose not to engage in the arts. And when we see good outcomes for people who are involved in the arts, we don't know if that was caused by the arts or if it's just the kind of people who are drawn to the arts are awesome, right? So they have awesome outcomes because they're awesome people, but we don't know that the arts made them awesome. We want to find out if it does. And the way to do that is to invent a doppelganger for them. And the way to do that is to conduct randomized experiments. Random assignment experiments or lottery-based experiments. They have a lot of different words, but it's the same thing, where what we do is we have large groups of people, and by chance, some people get some art experience, and by chance, some people don't. On average, the two populations are identical in every respect. So while we don't have an individual doppelganger for each person, collectively we do, because the two groups on average should be identical if they're large enough populations. The only difference is some got the experience, some didn't. If we see any difference in their outcomes later on, we know it was caused by this arts experience and not something that attracted people to the art experience. So we did that with a large scale, actually, maybe I can skip ahead, sorry. Here it is, yeah. So we did this with a large-scale random assignment experiment of field trips to an art museum. The art museum was Crystal Bridges, which is a new art museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. And because it was a new art museum in an area that never had one before, because there was very large popular interest in this museum, because they had a field trip program that was endowed with a $10 million endowment that made the field trips completely free to the schools. They paid admission, they reimbursed for the bus, they provided a free lunch, they even provided a substitute teacher for the school so that the teachers could come with the group on the trip. So it was completely free to the school. Everyone wanted to go. Everyone wanted to go right away, but they didn't have enough spots for everyone. And if you don't have enough spots, a fair way to allocate those spots is by lottery. And that allowed the opportunity for a random assignment experiment. So if ever any of you have situations where you have oversubscription for a program, think, I have the opportunity for a randomized experiment here. I should contact a researcher and see if we could do something. Because that's exactly what happened with Crystal Bridges. Anne Crable, who's the head of the museum education programs there, contacted us and asked us about what we could study, told us about this problem she had with oversubscription, and we knew exactly how to solve that problem. And she's now a graduate student in my program, so you know you can make converts out of people as well. So anyway, we randomly assigned some groups to come the first semester, and others had their tour deferred. The groups that had their tour deferred serve as the control group. On average, the two groups are identical to each other. We surveyed the students in their classrooms by research team members on average 3 weeks after the tour. And we did it, by the way, with no money. We didn't get paid by Crystal Bridges. We didn't get paid by anyone to do this. We did it with sweat capital and a little bit of internal funding in my department, and with child labor. These are my co-authors' children. My wife administered surveys. My mother-in-law administered surveys. I'm not making this up. So we pulled it off. And we pulled it off because we just were convinced that this was a great opportunity. No one had done something like this before. We really wanted to learn what would happen, what do students get out of an experience of going to an art museum. And we were able to pull it off in part because the schools were so cooperative, because they were so eager, that it was easy to work with them. Also, they were all local, pretty much local, although my co-authors and I did drive a total of 12,000 miles to administer surveys at 123 different schools in 3 different states. So we could do it with sweat capital and low funding once, but never again. We learned a bunch of things about what students get out of this experience. And it's important to note the kinds of outcomes that we looked at. We did not look at whether they did better on their math scores or whether they did better on reading tests, because we have no reason to expect that it would do that. I mean, one of the mistakes that I think art advocates make, besides kind of not having produced random assignment experiments in larger numbers, but another mistake is that they're looking for outcomes in areas where we shouldn't expect them. Because they're trying to please what other people think are important rather than making a case for what the arts do for themselves. The arts are important independent of math and independent of jobs. The arts do something for people, and so we tried to think about what those outcomes were. We listened to what the museum education program was trying to accomplish, and we tried to measure those things. And in particular, we found that students who went on a tour by lottery first could recall details of their experience, so they learned content. Now, we can't say whether they learned the content better than the control group, because the control group was not exposed to the content at all, but at least it was reassuring to know that the experience registered with them and they remembered a lot of detail about it, so that was good. But we also measured critical thinking skills, and we did that with a measure that was developed by the Isabella Stewart Gardner researchers at Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, where we showed all students a new painting, Bo Bartlett's The Box, and we asked students to write what they saw in that painting and why they thought that was there. And they wrote essays. We coded the essays blind, using a rubric that these other researchers had developed for critical thinking skills. Students who by chance go on a tour of an art museum are much better at critically thinking about a new work of art than students who don't. So you learn something. You learn how to analyze a work of art if you go on a tour of an art museum. We also found, interestingly, that students scored higher on a measure of tolerance if they went on a tour of an art museum than if by chance they didn't. Now, why would this be? Why would it make someone more tolerant? Well, if you think about it, this is, I think, a lot of what the arts are trying to do, which is to help people reflect on what it is to be a human being and what it's like for other people to be a human being. And in that process, you're more aware of and perhaps more accepting of the differences between people. We also think it's particularly important that these students were often coming from relatively narrow worlds, and an art museum was perhaps a window to a much broader, diverse world. We also found that they had an increase in historical empathy if by lottery they went on a tour of an art museum. That is, they were able to think about what it was like to live in the past. This was particularly true, we think, because the art museum is an American art museum that is organized chronologically, and so there's kind of an American history lesson in it, so they could think a little bit about what it was like to live in earlier times. And I think most importantly, perhaps from the perspective of advocates of the arts, is that going on an art museum by lottery made students significantly more likely to become consumers of arts in the future. And we know this not only because we asked them a bunch of questions about it, and they told us that they were more interested in the arts, more interested in going to museums, but we actually tracked their behavior. We gave all of them coded coupons, good for a special exhibit. We could see if they used those coupons at the museum. If students by lottery went on a field trip, they used their coupons at higher rates than if they were in the control group. They not only had they just been to the museum on a tour, but they came back to the museum at higher rates with their families. And so part of the importance, we think, of a field trip to an art museum is it trains young people to become consumers of the arts in the future. These benefits were all much larger for more disadvantaged students, students who were minority, low income, or from rural schools. Younger students also experience larger impacts than older students. If you do this kind of work, if you do a randomized experiment, I think it has a much bigger effect on policy debate than correlational work or compelling anecdotes. I mean, the correlational work and the compelling anecdotes are nice, but if you really want to move the ball forward with arts advocacy, we have to invest in evidence that other people will believe, and I think as proof of it is some very nice reaction that we got to this study. The New York Times covered it with a nice big piece in the Sunday Review section, and that's from that. And that piece was viewed many times on Facebook, and it was the #1 piece on the New York Times. And there's a reason for this. I mean, I think it was a good study, and I'm happy about that. But I think that there's a hunger out there for quality evidence on what the arts can do. People want to know, not only advocates and supporters of the arts, but people who might think that this is a frivolous activity that you can do without if times are tough, right? That's who you're trying to reach. People who are open to the idea that arts are important, but think, yeah, but it's less important than other things, so if we have to cut something, let's cut that. People, if you show them this kind of evidence, they are open to receiving it and very interested in it. But there are barriers to random assignment research. One is that very few people in the arts world have been trained to do this. There's this kind of double curse where people in the arts tend not to like numbers and people in the social sciences tend not to care about art, or tend not to think that there are any measurable outcomes there for them to look at. And so that's a problem. There also probably were ideal conditions for an experiment at Crystal Bridges because it was a new major art museum in an area that never had one. We don't get a major new art museum every day. In fact, we didn't have one for 4 decades in the United States, so it was a unique opportunity perhaps, but I suspect that there are little opportunities that all of you may know of programs that are oversubscribed, or instead of doing first come, first serve, think about doing a lottery and getting together with a researcher and seeing if you can learn something about what students get out of different art experiences. Also, randomized experiments are hard to conduct and can be expensive. Short-term studies like what we did can be pulled off at modest cost, but longitudinal studies, which I think is what people are really interested in, they want to know, does this stick with people over years? That's going to require a larger dose intervention, right? More art experiences than just a single field trip. And it's going to require a lot of money because tracking kids over time is hard and costly. But I think that it's worth it for the arts community to make this investment because even though it's expensive, it's trivial in cost relative to the amount spent on the content in the art world. So billions are spent on content and on facilities. Crystal Bridges alone has an $800 million endowment. The art in it, no one actually has a public available figure on the value of that art, but we're talking about billions in that one institution. Multiply this by many institutions in the United States. And that's just visual art. Leaving out theatrical art and musical art and every other kind of art. We're talking about many billions of dollars being spent on content and virtually nothing being spent on quality research. So I don't understand. If from the position of being an outsider to this world of the arts, I'd like to offer a tiny bit of criticism, which is, how is it that we can advocate effectively for arts if we're not willing to invest in demonstrating what arts do? Right? We have to learn before we advocate. We have to know, and not just know things that we can tell each other, but know things that we can tell people who are not already convinced. And I think that that's a very important next step for more effective art advocacy. If you'd like to read more about the study, there are a few different versions. There's the New York Times piece, but there's also a lay summary of the research available in Education Next. And then there are a series of more technical pieces going out into academic journals. The first one has already come out in Educational Researcher, but others are on the way. And I can also tell you, since I've just finished it, we have a second experiment of short-term effects. This one on average 47 days after the experience, of students being randomly assigned to see theater, going to see Hamlet and Christmas Carol. And I'll give you a little taste. I just finished the analyses, but the results are very similar to an art museum. So I think we're on to something here. There are measurable benefits for students of art experiences. We need to start collecting information on that in ways that can persuade people not already persuaded. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. Now we'll hear from Professor Jack Teves, Yale University.
Well, I'm pleased to be here today as a clinical community. Oops, I got to first get the thing up. Excuse me. There we go. There we are. Great. Pleased to be here as a clinical community psychologist. I'm usually presenting to healthcare professionals, researchers, or policymakers about the most recent individual or social intervention that might improve public health. So today I'm a little bit out of my element, and I ask you to forgive me if I don't know all the details about some of the artistic components about what I'll be talking about today. But I begin here with this building, and it illustrates a pretty well-known theory in sociology called broken windows. Some people may be familiar with that. So we have a building like this in a neighborhood that may have another building similar to that over time. And after a period of time, a number of decaying buildings start to have broken windows, they get abandoned, and what starts to happen is that the neighborhood starts to decay itself, and it undercuts the fabric of that community. Importantly, though, it's not just the buildings that are decaying. It's the sense of collective efficacy in that community as well. And when people talk about collective efficacy, they talk about things like neighborhood cohesion and trust, and the informal social controls of a community that binds it together. And so an example of an informal social control is that, let's say I'm driving in the street and I see a bunch of kids on a school day hanging out at a street corner. I might say, hey, how come you kids aren't in school? And they give me some answer. Say, well, I'm going to make sure to tell your mother or your father or your uncle or your grandmother about that. And then that helps bind that community together to keep those controls in place. That starts to decay when we have physical decay in neighborhoods. And studies have shown, population-based studies, that reductions in collective efficacy also have consequences in terms of our health. So there's a tie between physical decay of communities to collective efficacy to health impacts. But what happens if that building turns into this? Can we reverse the effects of decay on collective efficacy? Can we actually promote collective efficacy with the creation of a mural like this? And secondarily, can it change the people who actually made that mural? And in this case, this is a methadone maintenance clinic that was created by participants who are in treatment for methadone, for heroin addiction, but also from some of their neighbors that were in this community that helped them create this. So part of what I'll be talking about today, in the interest of time, is what happens to community perceptions when you have something like this happen. The remarkable partnership that was developed to do this work was started by Arthur Evans and Jane Golden. Arthur is the commissioner of the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities Services in Philadelphia, and Jane, who many of you may know, is the executive director of Philadelphia Mural Arts Program. About 7 years ago, Arthur approached Jane about the idea that they would like to make some murals with participants who are receiving behavioral health services, who may be in recovery from addiction or mental illness. Jane agreed, and in the last 7 years, there have been almost 24 murals that focus on substance use or mental health issues related to homelessness, violence, healing through faith and spirituality, and things like that. A few years after they started, they invited me to participate in this collaboration, myself and some colleagues at Yale, to actually study the impact of this at the individual and the community level. And we were fortunate enough to get a grant from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and also the Thomas Scattergood Foundation that allowed us to study this in a rigorous way. And this is the village that's made up our project, which is still ongoing. And even though officially it ends in June, we're actually having some data that we'll be getting from the Department of Behavioral Health on services that can only come at the end of the project. So it'll be going for the next 3 to 4 more months. But as you can see, there's my partners in particular, Sarah Ansel from Mural Arts, Samantha Matlin, and a host of other agencies and funders and colleagues at Yale. So what prompted Arthur to approach Jane was the challenges faced by Philadelphians, particularly those living in North Philadelphia and to areas of West Philadelphia. High levels of unemployment, homicides, many adults and children living in poverty, many folks having undereducated futures ahead of them, and all the sequelae that come from these kinds of challenges that they face. And neighborhoods like this are not uncommon in North Philadelphia, and these are the sorts of neighborhoods that many of the people that participate in our program and also receive services there live in. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation recognized this and identified social and economic factors as critical health indicators, so that it's more than just, you cannot treat only the individual needs, but also the context in which that individual lives. That prompted Arthur Evans to decide that he was going to move away from a traditional behavioral health system in which you treat the person and hope that things work well in the rest of the person's life, but move to a recovery and resilience-oriented system of care in which, yes, you still treat the person or through treatment or rehabilitation, but you take into account the context of that person's life, work and family, community relationships, faith communities, housing, things like that. And most recently, to add to that, a public health model in which you identify population-level indicators that you want to target, as we did in this project, focus on prevention and promotion, incorporate social and economic determinants of health, and use data to drive your decision-making. Because the reality is, there is a small percentage of people with serious mental illness, a larger percentage with a diagnosable mental disorder, but most of us are not challenged directly by that. Maybe at some point in our lives we will be, but day to day, you can affect the public health by targeting a broader swath of people with social interventions. That prompted the idea of this Porch Light project, to promote public health and community wellness through Porch Light. That name was identified because a porch light symbolizes a welcoming place, a warm and open place to accept people in who may have been oppressed or disenfranchised because of a mental illness or an addiction. And so this is where I usually hand it off to my mural arts colleagues, and so I'm flying solo today, so I'm going to do my best. But for those of you familiar with this process, the mural making process is done on parachute cloth. A design taking several months to do is identified, projected onto panels, and then those panels are what are painted on indoors. At the end of that process, it's installed outdoors and assembled that way. There's three principles underlying the process itself: engagement, collaboration, and generation. We seek to engage individuals, communities, and partner organizations through drawing, collaging, painting, writing, poetry, spoken word, weaving. And we try to do this to create a space for dialogue and expression and reflection. We also seek to collaborate, to have individuals share their stories, their vision, their history and their voice to create a common mission, a common vision. And then finally, we expect those two processes to not only create the result of a public mural that beautifies the space, but also potentially generating hope, awareness, connection with each other, understanding, and empowerment. Together, we hope that these processes foster resilience and promote public health. That's what the study sought to investigate. There are a number of components of this process. There's initially large-scale community engagement meetings with the neighborhood to have people have voice who are not going to be participants in the program about the mural. There's design development workshops with participants in the program. In the project that I'll be describing, they took place over a period of about 8 months, from October to June. There are dialogues that then go on between neighborhood residents and participants and artists and other stakeholders about the mural. Then there are periodic community paint days in which panels are brought outside on a nice day and everyone can participate in the painting of that mural. There's open studios at the end of the formal workshop period. The month or two as the mural gets finalized, ready for installation, anyone can come in and work with the artist to try to move that process towards installation. And then finally, this entire process is overseen by Jane Golden and her staff at Mural Arts to do design reviews, rigorous design reviews. Because of time, I won't show you this video, which is available on a number of sites. But if you do sign up for the handouts from this presentation, I have a sign-up sheet up here. I'd be happy to send it to you. And there's actually been 4 films made of Porch Light. They range from 2 minutes to a 25-minute, more comprehensive film. And they're really terrific. There are different stages. In one stage, we're kind of hoping to do this. Another stage, we're starting to do this. Another stage that we're starting to share some findings. So here are some examples of Porch Light murals, and then I'll briefly share some results. So this is a Bridging the Gap before mural. This is a Porch Light mural that's not going to be one that I'm going to report the evaluation of. This is the after of that mural. Here's the before on the always present curative force, the after. Here's the before of finding home, and after. Here's the before of healing through spirituality, and the after. And finally, here's the finding the light within, and here's the after. This was a community mobilization effort around suicide prevention. Our evaluation, the study design involved 4 mural sites in 4 different neighborhoods in North Philadelphia, North and West Philadelphia, and 4 comparison sites. Comparably comparison sites we examined through a variety of methods I can't talk about right now. All are distressed North of Philadelphia neighborhoods. We had 6 mural groups completed across 2 years. We assessed individual impact in 2 ways, through 6 to 8 follow-along interviews with 8 individuals across 1 year, as well as interviews of health functioning and neighborhood perceptions for 209 individuals with addiction and mental health challenges at the study entry, at a post-test, which is usually 4 to 9 months later, depending on when they enrolled, and then 4 to 6 months after that. That was our follow-up. We assessed community impact in 2 ways, through multiple systematic observations of neighborhood sites twice per year. We assessed physical decay. That's pretty self-explanatory about what happens to buildings. Physical disorder, those are things like trash, litter, graffiti on buildings, and social disorder. Those are people arguing in public, drinking in public, prostitution, things like that. And then we also did on-the-street interviews with up to 1,500 residents. I say up to because we're going to finish that project this month. We're at about 1,300 right now, and we have about 200 left that we'll do in the next 2 weeks. Of neighborhood sites, we do them twice per year, and it was focused on the broken windows perceptions, in particular collective efficacy, as well as aspects of the aesthetic environment. What I'll share briefly today is just the case study interview, one case study interview, and some data from our community perceptions interviews. We have comparable data from systematic observations that show some positive findings and some very promising findings from our individual interviews as well. So we had a logic model driving this process, and there's 3 murals that I'm focusing on in particular. One is Forgotten but Unshaken, which is the before. This is now the after. And in fact, the year 2 of this project has got the entire block having elements of this in it. I'm not going to be presenting data on that today as we're still analyzing that piece right now. This is a largely Spanish-speaking behavioral health clinic in North Philadelphia. This is Our Vision, Our Testament. This is at the building of Sobriety Through Outpatient, or STOP, also in North Philadelphia. And this is The Color of Your Voice, before, and that's the after. And that's also in North Philadelphia, about a block and a half from a subsidized housing program for women and children, women who have prior addictions. If we look at our case studies, one of the things we found across a number of individuals are 4 factors that seem to emerge through mural participation. An increased sense of friendship, increased sense of self-efficacy that people describe, a desire to give back to their community, and renewed hope. We believe, and we'll find through our longitudinal analyses, that those changes lead to increased community integration and reduced sense of personal and social stigma due to mental illness or addiction. Here's the case example who exemplifies a lot of effects that we've seen from other kind of follow-along interviews. This is Rose, it's not her real name. She grew up poor in North and West Philadelphia. She began to use cocaine and marijuana at 18 and lived on the streets for many years, had children, and then went in and out of treatment for addiction. She's now in treatment and also receiving subsidized family housing as part of her treatment. Here's what she tells us about friendship. I get to meet people, socialize. I don't like a lot of people around me, but now the other participants are like family. I'm all out giving my number and stuff. Now lots of adults are coming and they're helping the new people who come. So she's been connected now in a way that she previously was not. The sense of self-efficacy she describes is, I thought, oh my God, this is me putting up a mural. Never would have thought about that about me before, and here I am. Who would have thought I could make something? Here I am making a mask out of clay. Never would have thought. Deep inside, there's something amazing that we all can do, something we can make. And the artists show you this, bring it out of you, especially the mural. It's great. What illustrates giving back for her is, she says this, well, I look at it as a savior. She's talking about the mural arts program. Before I was clean, I couldn't love me. I robbed, stole, shot at people. I did all that. I didn't care. I didn't love me. I just wanted to get my drugs, marijuana, crack. Art doesn't make the monkey go to sleep. It's still there. It's always there, but I don't want to go back to being that way. Art makes me happy, though. I can be one of those people who do something. A poet, a musician, talk to kids, have talent. I can do that. It lets you know you don't have to be out there. You can do something. And finally, her renewed hope is illustrated with this phrase, this set of words. Seeing the artists is inspiring. They came from nothing. Now they're doing this. They are striving and making something of their lives and helping people, being role models. This is something you can do with your life that is positive. Instead of shooting, doing drugs, whatever, doing something positive and productive. Mural arts is the place to do it. I get to make stuff and put it up and say, I made this. That's amazing. And you think these profound words are unique, but in fact, I have been here, hidden as slides. Ben says very similar things. I have many other examples of this. We have found through various interviews with different interviewers, this is what people tell us qualitatively. And we're starting to see that over time with the quantitative results as well. Final set of analyses I'll share today are what happens to residents' perceptions of their neighborhood. These are people that were not involved in the program. These are people that live near the clinic. So we do interviews in about a half-mile radius of these clinics in 3 different street corners. Many folks don't even connect to the clinic per se. We do street interviews. These data are from 957 neighborhood residents in 6 of these sites, 2 points in time across 1 year. Again, it was the 3 murals I showed, and then 3 comparison sites. The outcomes are perceptions of neighborhood aesthetic quality, how nice the buildings are now, the quality of the walking environment, how comfortable you feel walking in that neighborhood, and then these 2 other collective efficacy measures I mentioned earlier, cohesion and trust, and informal social control. This is what we find for aesthetic quality for each of the mural sites. Now, remember, these are collapsed across 3 street blocks, not just the corner where the mural is. It's the other, maybe about 3 blocks away, corners as well. In all sites, these numbers go up dramatically, and in the comparison sites for each one, the comparable comparison site in terms of the neighborhood, they didn't. And this was a significant difference by site. It's obviously a significant difference across all sites, but by site, there are significant differences. So people definitely feel their neighborhood is more beautiful, even if we're not talking about the street corner right by the mural. How about the quality of the walking environment, another aesthetic indicator? This tends to go up, you can see from all 3, and the others go down, but there's a lot of variability in this one site, so there was no significant difference at that site. Across all 3 sites, there is a significant difference combined. So people feel better about walking in their neighborhood. Perceived neighborhood social cohesion. Well, this is where the rubber starts to hit the road. Can we reverse that process? You can see in this one site that had trouble last time, there was no real increased change over time from pre to post test, but there was changes in the other 2. And in fact, only in that one site did you get a significant increase. Another you got close, and the other you didn't. When you combine them all 3, you get a trend level significance combined across all 3, which is very promising. And finally, informal social control. Does that change over time? Again, that orange site looks like it did not increase, the other 2 did, and in fact, that's what we find. The other 2 have significant increases in informal social control, one key indicator of a collective efficacy, and we don't have in the third site. When we combine all 3, we get a significant site across mural versus non-mural sites. Very promising findings. It looks like we have a chance with this kind of intervention to affect perceptions of one's neighborhood. So what implications are there of this? Well, participatory public art through mural making, it can positively impact the health of persons with mental health and substance use challenges, as I showed with that one interview, but there are others to follow. And it also can strengthen communities by enhancing neighborhood collective advocacy so as to promote health. And finally, this shows that we can establish, this echoes a little bit what Jay is saying, we can establish successful partnerships among arts and social service agencies and university researchers to conduct rigorous studies of the impact of public art on health. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists for excellent presentations, very thought-provoking, and we now have about 20 or 25 minutes for your questions. And if someone wants to come to the microphone, you can ask one, and if not, I'll ask Lori a question, because we have a pretty noticeable difference between what she described as a correlative study and then 2 works that really try to have causational connections between arts and behaviors and perceptions. And I wanted to ask Lori just quickly, has your study, which has been out for perhaps a half year or so? October. Yeah. Has it been has been effective for you in your work?
Thanks, Bill. Yes, I think it has been effective. We really needed a way to talk about our work and also to get it out there in the community. Music Makes Us is a new initiative. It's just barely 2 years old. The community, the community didn't know about it. Yes, this is Music City, and yes, there did exist music education in our community. And there was foundational programs that existed, but the music education in the public schools and the music industry were here. So this is an effort to bring them together. And this was intended to be a benchmark study to show that we were going to work together to make this happen. And the correlational aspect of it, I think, worked for us. These are the kinds of things that we can measure. These are the kind of data that we can look at from year to year. We weren't necessarily trying to move the policy lever with this work. It showed us where the gaps were. It showed us where we needed to go. Our next research study will really look at internally the efficacy of our program design, and it's a very iterative process. Building the plane and flying it at the same time. It's what we do every day. And so this was helpful in that regard.
Thank you. And Jay, I was wondering, have you taken your findings into a public policy environment? Because not only is your work new in terms of its methodology, but also by extracting benefits that are unique to the arts, I'm curious about whether those benefits are compelling to characters who perhaps are skeptics and are not convinced. In other words, have you tested it in that realm?
Right. So we're just starting. We've just published the work and are busy on new work. And also, it's hard to both be the researcher and advocate at the same time. It's useful sometimes when there's a division of labor. But what I can say is just kind of one overall point, which was part of the motivation for doing the project in the first place, which is the arts are losing in education. I mean, there's no doubt about this. I mean, you should know that it's losing. And it's losing, there are a lot of measures of this. So, for example, time spent on the arts in schools, there have been lots of studies on this, are in decline. More time is being spent on reading in particular. Math actually has not changed. Reading's up, arts are down. PE is down, lots of other things are down too. So arts are getting squeezed out. In the area of field trips, in particular, culturally enriching field trips are in decline. And they're in decline either because schools are going on fewer field trips or because they're shifting towards reward field trips. And reward field trips are, I had a little photo up there of a bus in front of Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, they go to Chuck E. Cheese, amusement parks, movie theaters, bowling alleys, and they're doing it because people who are working in schools, the people who are administrators in schools, are not fully convinced that time and money spent going to an art institution is an important experience, right? So there are people out there, lots of people, who are good people trying to do good work in the world who are not convinced, who might be convinced. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the arts community has relied upon the conviction that everyone knows this is good, so it's just a matter of just getting in their face and reminding them of what they already know. But I don't think that's true anymore. Not everyone is convinced that this is good. Right. And that's why I think we need more evidence that can persuade people, policymakers, school administrators, teachers, to allocate resources and time towards enriching activities in the arts.
Thank you. Before we get to questions from our audience, I wonder if Jack would comment on how this very big project, very impressive project, landed on murals in the first place. I mean, there were a lot of things that could have been done to make neighborhoods more livable and make them more welcoming and make them function better. How do you have a sense? Either you in the room, or do you know what happened in the room when that initial connection was made?
Well, you know, Philadelphia has got supposedly 3,000 murals. So it's in the lifeblood of the city. Yeah. Murals are everywhere in Philadelphia, particularly in distressed neighborhoods, but really throughout the city. And you can't be in Philadelphia and drive around or walk without seeing half a dozen murals. And so Arthur, who moved to Philadelphia maybe about 10, 15 years ago, noticed this. And he started to wonder about the connection between the two, and then approached Jane after she gave a talk once, and he said, he's a clinical community psychologist, he said, she's talking my language. She talks about art as a catalyst for social change. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Jane say that. And when Arthur heard that, he said, let's try to do something together.
Great. Question?
Hi, I'm Eddie Torres from New York. I just wanted to say, first of all, a fantastic panel. Really, really great work.
Yeah. I agree.
So I had two fairly open-ended questions. I mean, the first is the issue of the great breadth of impact to which you could look in terms of the arts. You know, obviously the economic development argument has been made, you know, quite a bit, and here we've seen a breadth from academic performance to cognitive performance to mental health impacts, as well as sort of community-wide impacts. You know, so my first question is, you know, do you have a point of view on the issue of the breadth of arguments you could make in terms of the impact of a raft of arguments versus targeted arguments? And then the second one, I mean, sort of by target, I mean sort of discipline specific, first of all. And then second of all is the issue of the uniqueness of the arts as a means of impact versus, you know, there have been, I want to say this back in the 90s, the work around the economic impact of the arts and the extent to which the arts could be potentially switched out for some other economic development engine. And if there's any point of view you have on the uniqueness of the arts in terms of the kinds of impacts you're looking at.
Yeah, I think that particularly that second question, I think, is really an interesting one, and probably each panelist could comment. Jay, Jack, Laura.
Sure, I'll jump in. I don't know. It's an excellent question. The truth is that, at least from our study, we don't know what caused the effects. We know that the one group by lottery went on a bus and had a tour of an art museum where they saw 5 works of art. But, you know, some people say, well, how do you know it's not the bus ride? Or how do you know it's not just getting out of school? Or seeing an impressive building. I mean, to tell you the truth, that there were a large number of students for whom their visit to Crystal Bridges was the first time they rode on an elevator, right? So actually, I've been trying to convince the owner of a football team, and the stadium has art in the stadium. This is a thing now. The kind of people who own football teams also buy art. And they're now starting to display that art in their football stadiums. And so it's an impressive building, and it has art in it. And they have school tours going to football stadiums, right? They do. I mean, because kids want to see football stadiums.
Does it make their team win?
I don't know. It's good marketing for the team, but I don't know why schools are doing this, but they do. And so I've been trying to convince this owner that, well, why don't we see if we randomly assign people to see the art and the stadium, or just see the stadium? Do we get the same effect? Maybe just seeing an impressive building would be enough. And so the truth is, I don't know whether we could substitute for it. Now, I think what we have to guide us, other than doing another study, is we have theory. And if a theater experience produces something very similar to what an art experience does, and the theater doesn't have an impressive building, but the art museum does, that helps us narrow in and then help guide our theory that it's something about the content of these experiences that matters more than the facilities. But yeah, you have to be skeptical and worried about this. So I think it's an excellent question.
Yeah, and I think either Jack or Laurie, maybe both, would comment on this, because, you know, athletics might have the same sort of correlative effects, or what are your thoughts, Jack?
Well, when I sometimes talk about sports performance. I was a longtime basketball coach for many years, and if we only had a world without arts, can you imagine a world without arts? Can you imagine a world without peak athletic performance? For people, what would our world be like? It would be empty. It would be not filled with what brings the human spirit to where it is. And so I think we can make arguments for the benefit of these things, but I do think we probably have to make evidence-based arguments, because people can know internally the value of them, but when you start to compete against sciences and other kinds of knowledge, that's when you need to have more direct knowledge. I also think that the first question was, do you have a kind of a broad-based appeal or a specific appeal? I think it's a both and. I think you have to have both. I think it's helpful to have a broad-based appeal, but then be able to point, as Jay just did, different kinds of arts or different kinds of art experiences may have different effects.
Yeah, and Laurie, since you were looking at data that the school system had assembled, you could have sliced it in a number of ways. They could have looked at athletics and looked at other kinds of
Right.
participation. Did that happen, or?
It didn't happen. It could have. We can just keep asking questions, and I think that's going to be our job, just keep asking the questions. But there are other studies out there that indicate that arts are different from athletics. But there are also other studies that indicate that 4 years of study in any area is going to give you a bump in student engagement. So we know that to be true. And our study focused on music, not on visual arts, not on dance, not on theater. So what are the differences there? We did see in our study that there are differences in the kids even who participate in instrumental music versus the kids who participate in vocal music. So what is it about that ensemble experience that's different between instrumental and vocal? There's so much going on here. So you can go broad, or you can go deep, or you can just keep asking questions.
Here. Yes.
Hi, John McInerney. I'm from Philadelphia. So there was no, it was interesting because you didn't mention what the studies were in any of the materials. So I was really excited when I sat down and heard that the mural arts and Jane was going to be one of the programs. But all the studies were great. My question is about, we in Philadelphia, I work at the local service organization, the Cultural Alliance, and we started a program called STAMP, which provides free access to Philadelphia high school students, 14 to 19, to 12 of our major museums for a year. So they get a card and they can swipe it and go for free anytime, plus special events. And we've been really anxious. We've had a great turnout. We've had, we're gonna hit 10,000 kids at probably the end of this month that have signed up for the program. And we would love to think about ways to study the impact of the program. And Jay, with your program, you mentioned that it was randomized, but it was, I'm just wondering if there's some similarities to our program. The kids themselves have to sign up for the program. A lot of the community groups encourage them to sign up, and then it kind of went viral. But with your program, even though you said it was random, but it sounded like teachers had to express an interest in the tour. So, you know, I just was wondering, could some of those teachers maybe are just, you know, better teachers that wanted a tour, but selfishly in terms of our project,
Right.
how could we sort of embrace some of this best practice in research for our program?
That's a great question. How random is random?
No, so there are two separate issues here. One is what's called internal validity and external validity, just to give you the technical term. So if it's true, teachers have to apply. And so you can't wonder whether the teachers in the treatment group are different from the teachers in the control group, because on average they're identical. Only chance distinguishes between them, right? So the internal validity of an experiment is really solid. The two groups are on average identical. If you have a large enough group and you use only chance to distinguish between them. And you can also check this with observable characteristics about them, and they do look identical on average. The second issue you're getting at is one of external validity, which is, well, maybe the pool of teachers who apply for this thing, yes, maybe they produce benefits for their kids, but they're different kinds of people than everyone else who didn't even apply. Right, that this only generalizes, this is only applicable to certain kinds of teachers and certain kinds of schools. And that's not the case in our study, because in the first semester, in the first year of this program, school groups applied with almost 39,000 kids in them, and our total area only has 100,000 kids. So in the first year, 40% of all kids were scheduled to go to this museum. So it was virtually everyone in our community. Now, we do have a different kind of external validity problem, which is, well, okay, so it's true of Northwest Arkansas, but is it true of Philadelphia? And there we can't say. It may be our results only hold true for people in a rural, semi-rural area, who haven't had access to a major art museum. And if we did a similar experiment in Philadelphia, maybe we wouldn't find anything. So when thinking about how to study your own program, you have to think about issues of internal validity and external validity. Internal validity is, do you know if your program had an effect on the people who participated? external validity is would that be true of other kinds of people as well?
Thanks.
Other? Yes. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes.
I'd just like to go back to where Bill started in the beginning, which is first to put myself on the map. I'm a real fan of hard research in the arts, and I think it's necessary. However, I don't see it as a panacea for communicating the value of the arts. And the reason for that is what we know about, I think Bill was alluding to this in the beginning, the fact that generally speaking, conservatives in the United States are not interested in facts before a leap of faith is made that makes something seem true to them. And so, I mean, and I think all of us have some, sort of pieces of this in us. So I'd like to think about systems where even the presentation of hard data as it comes available has some sensitivity to the fact that there will be people who only respond to the case study stories in your work, and to make sure that those have prominence. There will be people who only respond to images of people really doing things and really won't look very hard into that. And maybe even we could present some hard data about the arts in a way that would allow people taking it in to make a choice. 2 buttons. Read the stories, see the data. And we could learn something about the people who are persuaded by both of those things. That's one thing that I'd like you to think about or comment on. And the second thing is, I really want to, I can't say how important I think the issue that Jay raises about what should be measured in the arts and whether you, for a long time I'm a cultural planner, and I've had a lot of fears about reliance on the economic development argument, because we know the arts contribute to economic development. We have no data whatsoever that suggests it's the most efficient or the best way of doing that. So, a house of cards is being built with a vulnerability, and I worry about similar things when we go to other means, and I tend to think that as a field in our advocacy, we devalue what we really as people experience as valuable about art, and try to pin its worth on external indications.
It's a good point.
Great comment.
Yeah, it's a very,
with
very
you on all counts.
Other question? Come up, yeah, please.
If I could, I just wanted to make a couple comments, responding to the program you've made. As many of you could probably guess by my appearance, I'm somewhat conservative, but attending these things is mind-boggling. It opens your channels to additional thought.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm David Laudadillo, and I'm representing the National Terrazzo Mosaic Association.
Okay. Yeah.
We hire many people that may come from your programs, people that have had problems early in life, but they have a creative bent. They have to for our industry. But one of the things I would just comment on, as I see, the mural program, if you don't mind, I was just going to say, share the stories of creativity by some of the people like Steve Jobs, who, he created things that were, people didn't even know they needed. Or Bill Lear, who created the magnificent Learjet. These are people that bailed out of school because it didn't do for them what it needed to do. And your ideas, with the creative arts, brings that to people, but it makes it relevant to industry captains. This country is starving to death for the creative mind. We're going to other countries to find it. What better place to draw from?
And that's, of course, a great question, is how we link up the work that all of us do with the with access to creativity. And I think I know we need a good randomized research project that demonstrates that connection. But I think we're just about out of time, and I want to thank you for your excellent questions, and certainly thank this wonderful panel for really great presentations this morning.